And there's so much amazing content in the book. We're not even going to come close to covering it all today. So it's called The Way of the Warrior. Amazon's probably the best place to pick it up, I would imagine. But it's such a timely, it wasn't written during the time of what we're going through now, but it seems to only be exemplified right now with the racial tension, with coronavirus that's going on, and people in lockdown. It's like some of these problems are being amplified: anxiety, stress, depression. And as we know, the more depressed you are, the harder it can become to actually make positive change in your life. It's like you get stuck in this spot where the people that are living with joy and peace, it's easier for them to embrace change and growth and stepping into their greatness. So could you elaborate a little? Why is it that people feel stuck when they need to change the most?
This past week, I was telling my wife, I did not write The Way of the Warrior for this moment, but it is perfect for this moment.
Right.
It's as if in the writing of this book, I could have predicted this moment. The book actually has two frequencies. And one of the frequencies is to speak to the person who's struggling with depression, anxiety, panic attacks, stress, who feels overwhelmed by life, to deal with that inner battle, that inner world. And, you know, I mean, when I was 12 years old, I was in a psychiatric chair. And so I know what it's like to feel the pain and torments of your inner world being in chaos and in ruins. And I felt like I had to go through a lifetime of reconstructing my inner world. And so a huge part of The Way of the Warrior is saying, look, if you're struggling with depression, if you're struggling with a sense of insignificance, with loneliness, with fear, with anxiety, one, you're not alone. And it doesn't make you a coward. This is actually the battle that matters. It's your response to these things that will shape who you are. And that narrative is so important right now, because what people are not really paying attention to is, you know, we're fighting this coronavirus, we're fighting this COVID-19, and telling people stay inside so that you don't die of a virus. And we're ignoring the massive impact it's having on mental health. The ramifications of this quarantine is going to be felt for decades after we have a vaccine for the coronavirus. And I don't know if the therapeutic capacity we have is actually going to help people with the PTSD and the amount of emotional, relational, psychological damage that's happening during this time. And so I think this part of the book is so important. But there's also another part of the book that's hidden in the middle of the book. I originally was writing this book, and it was called Self-Mastery. And in fact, what's so interesting is, you know, there are Christians that are involved sometimes in my publishing, and they hated the phrase self-mastery. And they go, no, it's not about self-mastery. It's about, you know, Christ mastery. And the problem is that I hate cliches, and anybody who knows me that I'm about as irreligious as a person can be, being a passionate follower of Jesus. And I'm like, no, you're not dealing with reality. If people do not gain self-mastery, they cannot live this life the way that they're created to live. And so I wrote 3 chapters in this book in a triad that reflect what I found are the principles of those who have the highest level of self-mastery. And it focuses on energy and ownership and mindset. And so in the middle of the book, there's a whole other book. Yep. And it's a frequency, not for the person who says, I'm struggling with depression or anxiety. It's for the person who says, I want to optimize my highest level of capacity. I want to leave nothing on the shelf. And I want to have a level of self-mastery of a world-class athlete, of a world-class Navy SEAL, of a world-class businessman. And I want to achieve this level of self-mastery.
That's great. Definitely helpful for both sides, for sure. And I think the self-mastery can help when you come out of the depression and the anxiety as well.
Absolutely. And you're never happiest than when you have a deep sense of fulfillment, that you're fulfilling your purpose, your intention in life. And when you're actually creating something beautiful, you don't usually have time to think about even the disappointments in life. And it really is. We all have multiple stories inside of our souls, and it's which story you decide to step into. You know, I could be depressed every day, or I could be full of joy every day. You know, I could look at what's not working in my life every single day, or I could find something that's really working in my life every single day.
I have 9 stars next to a quote here in my notebook from the book. It said, "The world within you will create the world around you." And it's the filter that you're running things through in your mind.
Yeah, and this morning I just wrote this sentence and I put it down. Your experiences are not what make you unique. It's your response to those experiences that make you unique.
Absolutely.
And it's because I'm helping a friend of mine who's writing a book, and she has a lot of her experiences in the book. And I said, just remember, it's not your experiences that make you unique. And I never knew my real father. I'm an immigrant from another country. English was my second language. I was in a psychiatric chair by the time I was 12 years old. I was flunking out of school from 1st to 12th grade. All those feel unique, but there are other people who've been through that too. And what I believe makes me unique is how I responded to those things, and how I allowed those things to shape who I am, and how I used those experiences, both highly negative and some positive, to shape who I am as a human being. And so a person can be fatherless and use that as the context for why they never achieved anything. Or a person can be fatherless and use that as the context for why they rose above those things and decided to be a great father and to have a great marriage and to create a great life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so true.
It is true. And this question kind of evolves right into that. People who are like struggling with depression or anxiety or whatever, it's very hard for them to find any kind of peace within themselves or around them. Are there some like little tiny steps that they can start to take where they can try to find some peace? Anything that you suggest?
Yeah, I think you want to avoid the word, are there any techniques?
Oh, yeah.
Right? But really, we're just looking for some coping mechanisms. Right?
Yeah, that's a better way.
My son Aaron, who's just turned 32, we have a podcast called Battle Ready. And it was born out of the book Last Arrow. And the podcast is coming out next week. It's actually called Coping Strategies. And because sometimes you just need to know, what do I do right now? And
right.
So I think the first thing you have to do is get in touch with reality. That if you're struggling with fear or depression or anxiety, or you feel alone, or just realize that you are not different. That you are experiencing human emotions. That it's not unhealthy or unusual or abnormal to feel those things. Everyone feels those things. Not everyone allows those things to shape who they become and how they experience life. So first of all, don't think that there's something wrong with you just because you feel sad, or just because you are discouraged, or just because you feel depressed. Realize that's the full spectrum of human emotions. That just means you're a human being. So accept the fact that you're a deeply feeling human being. And someone texted me this week and said, I don't want to be labeled as someone who's depressed. And I said, then why don't you just get labeled as a person who has deep emotions and is in touch with them, and then rise above them and use that material to create a better life. And so here's a couple of things you can do. One, when you're depressed, you normally make bad decisions. And strangely enough, like when you're going, oh, I feel so lonely, guess what you decide to do? To isolate. And so realize that when you're depressed, or when you're in this negative emotional state, you'll make bad decisions by nature. So what you have to do is maybe keep a little notebook that gives you 5 good decisions you need to make all the time. And then whenever you're not doing well, go back and go, okay, one of the things I do when I'm not doing well is I start exercising. Oh, by the way, that's what you guys do, right? This whole fitness world. And you know what's crazy? Scientists who have been studying the human brain have been saying that the best defense against Alzheimer's is physical exercise.
Yep. Moving of the body and the brain connection.
Yeah, and so my wife, because there's a history of that in her genetics, she's so worried about it. And I'm like, wow, little did I know my decision to keep playing basketball at 61, almost 62, my decision to keep exercising, my decision to stay healthy was protecting my brain. Mm-hmm. And so here's a couple of things I tell myself. When I'm not doing well, do the things I don't want to do when I'm not doing well. I exercise, I eat well, I get around optimistic people. Look, when you're in a pessimistic, negative mode, the last thing you want to be around is positive people. They irritate you. They frustrate you. They're not dealing with reality. They don't get you. They don't understand you. But that's who you need to be around. And the fourth thing I do is I don't make everyone my audience for my misery. I actually become a listener to pay attention to the joy of other people's lives. What happens when you're not doing well is you keep retelling the negative stories. And you look for people who want to hear how miserable you are. That reinforces how miserable they are. So you need to get around people who don't have the patience for your misery. I know that sounds terrible.
That's a great, I had never heard that one before, but it's kind of like misery loves company, and you see people complaining, they kind of stick together, and then you don't want to be around the optimistic people because it just makes you feel worse about your situation, but it stops you from reinforcing it. And then, as we know, iron sharpens iron, and 3 strands are harder to break.
I made a decision, and this was probably before I actually came into a life-changing relationship with Jesus. You know, anyone who knows me well knows that my life is completely affected, impacted by the person of Jesus. But before I actually came to faith, I had to struggle with the depression and the sense of despair in my soul. And I don't know if I would have survived long enough to come to Jesus, and if I hadn't found a couple of techniques. And one of the things that I did before I came to faith is I told myself, I realized my whole story is 4 or 5 negative stories. My entire identity is remembering 4 or 5 negative experiences over and over and over again. Mm. And so I reframed my past by looking for 4 or 5 positive experiences in my past, and that I could actually begin to rebuild my own personal identity. The second thing I did is I trained myself to look for beauty every day. And it's funny now, you know, my daughter's 28, Mariah, my son's 32, Aaron, and they all joke. In fact, yesterday, my daughter was joking about how I have this compulsion for pointing out beauty all the time to everyone. And it's because when you're depressed, you are blind to the beautiful. And when you see beauty, you become numb to the depression. It's like the depression just begins to disappear. And so I began, when I was young, to identify beauty all around me. And I think it's part of what ended up turning me into an artist, is because I just saw beauty everywhere, and I wanted to be a part of that creative process. And so I'd say to people, it's 2 things. Choose the memories that you build your identity on. Second, choose what you see every day. Make sure you see beauty all around you.
Yeah.
Right. We have so many memories, and you're pointing out choose to remember some of these good things instead of focusing on these bad memories. We have so many memories. Why would we on purpose choose the bad ones?
I think most people think that they are the slaves to their mind. And so whatever their brain, whatever their mind is pouring out into your soul, you think you're the victim of that. Your brain is not your master. You are your brain's master. You are your mind's master. So stop letting your imagination and your mind tell you where you're going to spend your time. You tell your imagination and your brain and your mind where it's going to spend its time.
When you went through the battle with cancer, which you've been very open about, you said you gave yourself permission to feel whatever you were going to feel because you weren't sure, what the outcome was going to be. But the part that really gave me the chills was that you had peace during this time. Could you explain, during that battle when you were in the hospital before the surgery, how did you feel a peace during this time? Or how is that different than previously?
It's so interesting. Well, you rarely win the battle you're in the moment if you haven't prepared for it in a moment before that. And so even when I wrote The Last Arrow and I was sharing how when they told me I had cancer, and I think it was stage 3, stage 4 cancer, it started in my prostate, obviously, but it went into my bladder and it went into my lymph nodes. And so it had already spread. And they moved me really quickly to surgery. They told me all the other options were not an option for me. and I had to go in and have surgery. And that was probably 3 weeks after, or 4 weeks, within 3 weeks, I think, after being told I had cancer. So I only had less than a month where I discovered I had cancer, and I went in for the 6.5-hour surgery. And it was over the Christmas vacation. It was over my wife's birthday. It was over our wedding anniversary. So there were like significant moments as a family where we had to carry that. And at that point, I didn't know whether I would come out of that. I didn't know. You know, it's an interesting thing when you go into a surgery, not knowing whether it'll be the last time you see your family. But those things are real. The surgery is supposed to last 2 hours. It lasted 6.5 hours. And minutes before they put me under, they had to explain to me they found more cancer than they expected that morning. That was going to be more complicated than they thought. You know, all the things you want to hear right before, you know, they put you under. And but I had the strangest experience the whole time. I never felt any fear. And I've come to conclude that much of our fear is rooted in regret. That we felt like we haven't lived our lives well. We didn't love well. We didn't live well. We didn't choose well. We didn't risk. We didn't take that adventure. We didn't step into that romance. We didn't take time to do the things that mattered. And frankly, though I've lived far short of a perfect life, I didn't have any of those regrets. And I've been married 36 years, and I've loved my wife with every fiber of my being. And you know, I have a son and a daughter, and we have a daughter that we adopted and brought in. I've loved my family and my kids, and we traveled the world together, and we did life together. And I think they would both say that we're the best of friends, not just family. So I didn't have any regrets there. You know, and I think those were decisions that were made way before that moment. You know, I wasn't trying to work up courage. I wasn't trying to find a way to have no fear. It wasn't an outcome of something I was trying to achieve. I wasn't thinking like that. I was facing cancer and watching my family weep at the possibility that I might die. I felt sadness, but more of my sadness was to leave such beautiful things. You know, to leave a family I loved and a life I loved. But I didn't feel any anger, any bitterness, or any fear. And frankly, if I could just apply this now to this global pandemic, and the podcast we just released today, it's always interesting what people highlight. And I'm sure like with your podcast, people start posting right away, you know, and they start identifying something that was said in that podcast that has stuck to them. And I don't necessarily remember saying this in the moment, but here's the statement from the podcast that came out today. It said, "I never think the best decisions are made when you are afraid of dying. The best decisions are made when you're committed to living." And I think the reason we've had such bad, such a negative response to this pandemic, I think such terrible strategies in dealing with this quarantine. I think the reason we're so paralyzed as a nation is we're making decisions based on the fear of dying rather than a commitment to living.